Okay, and that's what I was trying to get at, that the infrastructure technologically is there. Now, Art, we have a question or a comment from the chat room, a question for you in particular. And the comment is that I've never seen government stay within its constitutional boundaries. By the time the violation becomes news, it is too late. How can we ensure that government will not restrict the freedom of speech on the Internet if we grant the government oversight of the Internet?
We've seen what's happened already back in the Bush administration. I was very interested to listen to Mike's discussion because you remember the great scandal of the domestic spying when all of the traffic was going through that one central office in San Francisco of AT&T's, and the NSA was tapping it. And there was a big fight in Congress because some people, including some most prominent civil liberties groups, wanted the telephone companies published for illegal domestic spying. And the phone companies had to go to Congress to get themselves immunity. Now, your correspondent has a point. Can anyone be sure of every instance of government control? Well, it depends how you define the government control. I'm sure there's a lot the government does that you or I don't know about. What we do know about, and what this particular discussion is about, is how you enable freedom on the Internet. And you enable freedom by simply saying no one has control. That's what neutrality is. It's a way of saying it's the polar opposite of a responsibility. Say like the fairness doctrine, which back in the old days, you had to do this. You had theoretically to present both sides. I mean, what we're going back to is a fundamental centuries-old concept of neutrality.
Right,
all
but
the traffic goes.
Art, just so you know, as a broadcaster, my objection to the fairness doctrine is you promote the side you like in prime time. You promote the other side at 5 in the morning.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, the fairness doctrine was honored in the breach most of the time anyway, but it was the point of government imposing an affirmative obligation as opposed to government saying stay out of the way. So, as the First Amendment says, government shall make no law. I mean, that's the point of net neutrality. You can trace all the way back to, the 16th century and say, look, everyone has to have equal access to the road or to the canal or to the bridge or whatever. That's the whole point.
Okay. Seton, what happened on December 21st, 2010?
The FCC again did what they tried to do in 2007 and regulate the Internet under Title I so as to usurp the authority necessary to implement net neutrality, which they, again, do not have the authority to do. And they voted on a 3-2 Democrat Party line to do so. And it was a huge, the reason this is frightening is, and you want to talk about government intrusion, I asked that question earlier of Art. I just named off, and I can name a lot more, 3 governments that are preventing their citizens from accessing Internet content, and then I asked them to name any net neutrality violations by providers, and the answer is there aren't any. The Comcast BitTorrent thing that arose in 2007 was remedied rapidly by the 2 parties involved. BitTorrent and Comcast got together, reached a mutually agreeable conclusion to the situation long before the FCC even got involved. There are, at the time of the vote, there were 0 net neutrality violations. None of the providers, the private sector providers, had done anything to warrant the assault by the FCC, and it is an assault. There is, again, I want to reiterate this because it's very important. The FCC can't do anything unless and until Congress writes law making it so, and they have not done so. Again, by the FCC chairman's own words to the Washington Post. So, Art talks about laws we have in place to prevent things and regulations that are supposed to prevent the government from doing these things. The chairman of the FCC admitted there isn't any law that allows him to do this, and he did it anyway. So in the old sailor saying, we're off the map now, and out here there be monsters.
Here. Well, the what I kind of wonder, and Art, maybe you can feel this. What I wonder is that why it was necessary to bring forward this bill in the last days of the last Congress. That sounds like it's a political, not a for the good of the people type of antic by Congress.
Wait, are we talking about the FCC or talking about Congress?
Well, okay, I'm talking about this. Wasn't this voted on? Wasn't this an act that was passed in Congress on the 21st, or was it just?
No, that was the Federal Communications Commission that acted.
Oh, I apologize. It was not an act of Congress.
No, not at all.
So this is just the FCC acting. So how do you then respond to that, though? That if the FCC has the authority to just do what it did then?
Well,
without an act of Congress.
Let's go back to what I said earlier. In 2005, the FCC took these broadband services out from the common carrier part, the consumer protection part of the Communications Act, and put it into Title I. Now, where was Congress then? Answer, nowhere. This is the kind of thing that administrative agencies do all the time. Nobody screamed and yelled, except some people perhaps on our side said the FCC shouldn't do this. No one in Congress said you can't switch that out without a bill. No one called it an abuse of power. Now, all of a sudden, when the FCC wants to consider reversing some of that to the detriment of the phone companies, to the benefit of we, the Internet users, then all of a sudden becomes only Congress can do it. I don't buy that. I think that's situational ethics, and I think that the FCC has the authority. It probably didn't choose the wisest authority to do this, but it certainly has authority to do that. That's why you have administrative agencies. That's why Congress delegates these kind of things to agencies.
President Obama, or actually I will not call him president because I don't recognize his citizenship. I call him illegitimate president. But he is spearheading a plan to boost web security by issuing American computer users an Internet ID. Now, Commerce Secretary Gary Locke has been very quick to come out and say this is not a big brother government device. Okay, he says it's not a national ID. He says we're not talking about a government-controlled system. We're talking about enhancing online security and privacy and reducing and perhaps even eliminating the need to memorize a dozen passwords through creation and use of digital identities. Now, according to the White House cybersecurity coordinator Howard Schmidt, the move does not mean that anonymity is compromised. He says, I don't have to get a credential if I don't want to. And he says there is no chance of a centralized database emerging from this. Michael, you're the technical person. Is that really so? If an Internet user ID, according to what Obama wants to create, if such was created, is that simply a harmless digital ID that can't be used for any adverse reasons? Does that still protect your anonymity?
In a word, no. I see this exactly as the SSN. All promises were made up front. This will never be used to identify, catalog, control, or otherwise monitor Americans. And it was, 7 years before they started using it for other purposes? Any time a government issues an ID and they have the what I call track-back information, in other words, they can take the number and track it back to a particular citizen, it's fraught for abuse. I mean, it is the nature of government to abuse those it is sworn to protect. And any time they have a control of any kind or a handle on you, for lack of a better term, they're going to use it to drag you around by the nose. Yeah. Scares the hell out of me.
So, in other words, you don't have any great faith in that Internet ID. I mean, I flinch when I see those types of terms.
When anybody mentions this kind of thing to me, I have one standard response. Yeah, did anybody else ever lie to you?
Very good. Art, okay, we're talking net neutrality. Okay, we're talking the idea, the idea that, I guess, one side or the other of an issue should not be given excessive attention. I get. Is that how you define it? How would you define?
No, that has nothing to do with net neutrality.
How do you define it?
It's not an issue-based. It's more a commercial-based arrangement. And you can see, part of it popping up in what a cellular company proposed just the other day. The idea of net neutrality is that, let's suppose, Brent, that your website, let us suppose that in order to reach me, my Verizon, the phone company on my end, goes out to websites and say, hey, if you want the best quality service to get to your customers, it's going to cost you another, say, $10K a month. Now, if you're big enough to afford it, then maybe you can pay it. But if you're not, and startups aren't, and innovators aren't, then you'll immediately be put at a disadvantage. All net neutrality says is look, the traffic that goes over the pipes, over the Internet, when it reaches the consumers, does so in an equitable fashion. It goes to the traffic, it goes to consumers because consumers want it. It does not function better or worse because someone paid off the middleman. It functions this way because that's what the Internet is. It's a best efforts network that functions for the big and for the small. And everyone pays into it. And contrary to what we heard before, you and I pay into it every month with our monthly bills. The big companies, I have no idea what Netflix's transport Internet bills are, but they must be huge. Same with YouTube. Because those guys have to have web connections in order to send their data out to get to you and me. So there is an equitable system here, and that's the way it should be. Not one bit of information goes from a Netflix server or a YouTube server unless you or I request it. And we want to make sure that if I want to look at some, tiny little hip-hop website, or I want to look at some humongo iTunes, big commercial music website, that we can do so, and the network serves everyone equally.
Our featured guests are Seton Motley of lessgovernment.org, Michael Curtis, former special ops and technical guru, Art Brodsky, communications director of Public Knowledge. The topic is Internet regulation. We want to take a moment and find a little something about each of our panelists and how you can get in touch with them and find out more about what they do. Seton Motley is president of Less Government, www.lessgovernment.org. So tell us something about the organization, what you do and how you go about doing it and how people can get involved.
Right. Right now, that website, we're still building the website. I'm kind of new. So there's no actual website yet at that address. There will be shortly. What we do is we work to reduce the size, scope, and sphere of influence of government. In very short order, we're going to have a less government pledge, which will read, while we will work for less government whenever possible, we will not vote for any budget that raises any bill beyond population plus inflation. We're also going to we're going to rate members of Congress, not as a percentage, like a voting percentage, but on a dollar amount. Your congressman voted for X billion dollars above population plus inflation growth. So people can begin to understand just how their congressmen and congresswomen are acting, and senators. Beyond that, we're going to work on closing actual entire cabinet-level departments. We're going to do that by starting out with a biography of each department. We'll take the Department of Education and say, okay, what's their annual budget? How many employees do they have? How many employees of over $100,000 do they have? And then start going through their program rostrum and finding the absurd, the ridiculous, the inane, which will be the vast majority of it, and say, okay, these programs cost this much, this program costs this much. Just so people have the average American has the nebulous sense that government is too large, but they don't have any tangible evidence. We're going to give the American people the numbers so that they know what government is spending money on, how it's wasting it, how it's much, much too large, and how they can go about helping reduce it.